Why would they take him out if he was their biggest fan? They say, well, he wasn't. You can blame them for a lot. You can't blame them for literally everything that takes place on Earth. And for literally the past week, uninterrupted, nonstop, she has been pushing this narrative on her show that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. That Netanyahu killed Charlie Kirk because he refused to bribe.
Nick Fuentes slammed the idea that Israel had any hand in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and in this video just completely denounces those spreading this theory and jumping to conclusions that this was the case. In so doing, he slams some pretty prominent people, so let's weigh in to see if he's right. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
So as you know, for the past week, there has been a vigorous debate about who killed Charlie Kirk. Now, the FBI has a suspect in custody. They've charged him. His name is Tyler Robinson. Tyler Robinson is in custody, but there are conspiracy theorists on the left who say that he's a groyper. We have reason to believe, based on what has been reported to us by the governor of Utah and law enforcement, that Robinson was of the left. But there's a contingent on the internet which insists that it was not Tyler Robinson at all. It wasn't the radical right or the radical left, but it was Israel, that Israel struck down Charlie Kirk. Ordinarily, that would be a completely ridiculous thing to say. Completely, utterly ridiculous. You would be laughed out of any room for suggesting that. Why? Because Charlie Kirk was pro-Israel his entire life. Pro-Israel to the hilt. And as far as I'm aware, that never changed.
Yeah, for the most part, I agree. He was very pro-Israel. He had, minor qualms here and there. The pressures he was feeling came out in that interview with Megyn Kelly. Apparently talking about this summit that was thrown at the Hamptons by Bill Ackman, trying to pressure him to get back in line and maybe not talk about the fact that Epstein could have been a Mossad agent. And the fact that, some of the reporting shows that, behind the scenes, he might have been wrestling with this to some extent, but largely he was a known Zionist, rabidly so. He wasn't Ben Shapiro, I will say that, but he certainly wasn't Dave Smith or anywhere close to that. So for the most part, I agree. But we know from the Gray Zones reports and some close people to him, like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Dave Smith, he was having some reservations about the Israel first mentality and Israel's influence in the United States. That's true too. But he wasn't Ben Shapiro. He certainly wasn't Dave Smith.
But there is a conspiracy theory that has been promulgated, notably by Max Blumenthal, a Russian shill and a far-left Jew. Candace Owens, another Russia shill and a complete grifter, among others. Jackson Hinkle, another Russian shill, far-left communist. These three have been promulgating the theory that Charlie Kirk was killed by Israel, and they say that is because Charlie Kirk was on the verge of an utter transformation. He was going to start criticizing Israel, apparently, any day.
Okay, so this is absolutely nonsense. I'm not 100% sure about Jackson Hinkle. I think he has been floating the idea, or at least telling people to consider the idea, but certainly Max Blumenthal and Candace Owens have not said that Israel committed this crime and murdered Charlie Kirk. Here's just an example from Max's Gray Zone article that apparently, is, I guess, what he's referring to, where he doesn't say that there's any evidence of an Israeli government role in Kirk's assassination whatsoever. Instead, this article spills the beans about some of the things that were happening behind the scenes with Charlie's donors, not exactly liking some of the things he said, some of the people he invited to a recent Turning Point conference, including Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith, both of which that uttered statements that were critical of Israel, and in Tucker Carlson's case said that, hey, Epstein was probably working for Israel, guys, and it's not anti-Semitic to say that, but in no case does he ever say in this entire article that Israel was to blame. Candace didn't either. She's never said that. And in fact, in the first episode where she talks about, the actual things that were pressures on Charlie's life, she said that explicitly in that episode on September 15th. So he's just wrong here. As far as Jackson Hinkle, I'm not 100% sure.
That he had a significant falling out with his Jewish donors, that they were blackmailing him, interrogating him, intervening, berating him, attempting to bribe him. And since his death, we were told that they were lying about him. But it's been a full week. I was very skeptical of the theory, and the reason being because although I didn't know Charlie Kirk personally, I fought Charlie Kirk for 6 years. And the primary reason that I fought Charlie Kirk was his support for Israel. And that never changed. I had been banned from all of his events for that reason, ostracized by his movement until the day that he died. He refused to debate me because of that issue. People would call into his show and either supporting or opposing me, ask about me and my following, and he insisted that I was an anti-Semitic troll. At one point, he even said there was some concerned caller asked about her young children. She said, my high school age children are Nick Fuentes supporters. What do I tell them? You know what his response was? He said, Jew hatred, blaming the Jews for everything is a mental illness. He said, what would be more productive? Tell them to observe the Shabbat on Saturday. I'm not making this up.
I actually believe him. I can't confirm this, with my sources, but it was known that Charlie actually adhered to the Shabbat as a Christian. That is weird to me. I'm not going to lie. That goes against what I believe is inherent in Christianity and the worship style and patterns we're supposed to follow from the Bible, rooted in that context and not the old law, which Jesus fulfilled, by the way. That's weird, but I believe him on this because Charlie was open about the fact that he observed that. And he routinely talked about that in various interviews, by the way.
He said, tell them to take a Hillsdale course. Tell them to observe the Shabbat. That's who we're dealing with here. And I only say that for the sake of this argument. I don't say that to be disrespectful. Those are the facts. That's what he said. That's what happened. But there has been this insistence over the past week that, no, you don't understand. He was on the verge of turning it all around, and they had to take him out. Now, I asked the obvious question, which is, well, really? Why would they take him out if he was their biggest fan? They say, well, he wasn't. I said, well, why wouldn't they take out somebody that was explicitly criticizing Israel, like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or me or anybody who has been explicitly criticizing Israel over the past year? They say, well, he was unique because he was so powerful with the youth. Okay.
This is actually a fair argument because the youth is turning away from Israel anyway, and you can argue, well, Charlie's influence may have led it to turn faster, and that's true, but it's the boomer cons, the right-wing conservatives that, are more beholden to following and watching people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Many have turned away from especially Candace Owens because what she said about Israel. But, those people have more influence over the older conservatives that are in lockstep with Israel. So to some extent, I think this is a fair argument, a fair consideration that both of those two are arguably more, influential than Charlie. I think they are overwhelmingly so. But Charlie did have that unique niche with the young people. So this is a fair thing to at least bring up.
So I ask a very simple question. I say, well, where's the evidence? Where's the connection? For this, people are calling me a shill for Israel. Really? I asked for the evidence. You know what I saw all over Twitter this week? The clip went up last night during my show where I said there's no evidence, there's no connection. And I'm not making this up. I saw people say, we don't need evidence. I saw somebody else say the precedent is the evidence. In other words, Israel kills people all the time, so that's evidence that they killed Charlie because they kill a lot of people. Somebody else said, well, we'll never get evidence because that's how good Israel really is. There's no connection. There's no evidence. There'll never be evidence.
That's a pretty convenient, case to make, that there'll never be evidence, and that's how we know that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. I think that's pretty ludicrous, by the way, that we'll never get evidence, but that's how we know that there is evidence. Like, that just doesn't comport to reality for me. So I think he's basically on the mark here. He's right. There is the precedent of the mass killings by Israel. You just look at the Wikipedia page, broken down by decade, thousands of documented political assassinations. Doesn't mean it happened in this case, but I can in some ways understand why people's minds at least jump to entertaining that. I can't really understand why they jump to digging their heels in, yeah, it had to be Israel. No other possible explanation with, no through line here, no actual connection to any shooter that they're proposing. But the fact remains.
People said, what do you expect? They're going to come out and admit it? Well, I think there's some room between zero evidence and an admission by the Israeli state. Maybe there's some connection, some, something. And then, this was the best part. Get a load of this. Candace Owens, who has been promulgating this theory for the past week, she's been getting unbelievable viewership. And you know what? Congratulations, you did it again. She's got unbelievable viewership. Isn't that what it's ultimately about? Candace Owens finally admitted tonight that Israel wasn't behind it at all. And she never said they were. Actually, she never claimed that. Never said that. She said Israel had nothing to do with it. I never claimed that they did. Really? This is the tweet. This is from her Twitter earlier today. She writes, "It's crazy how I never once said that Israel murdered Charlie Kirk, but the Zionists are repeating that without a shred of evidence. Remember, if they aren't lying, they aren't breathing." Okay, really now? Seriously? So get a load of this. For the past week, she has been insisting to millions and millions of people on Twitter, on YouTube, that she is an investigator, a reporter. She's got the receipts. She's got the evidence. And look at the way that she puffs herself up. Don't lie to me. You can't lie to me. He was my friend. I'm going to bring all the receipts. Unacceptable. And for literally the past week, uninterrupted, nonstop, she has been pushing this narrative on her show that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. That Netanyahu killed Charlie Kirk because he refused to bribe.
All right, I can't even explain how wrong this is. There's so many things wrong with what he just said, but let's just dive right into it. He recorded this podcast on September 17th. Candace Owens recorded her first podcast talking about the particulars of the pressures on Charlie in regard to this subject on September 15th. And let me show you a clip from that podcast. The first time she weighed into this subject, like who was culpable for killing Kirk, she did have one episode before this where she just related, personal experiences with Kirk, him meeting his wife, their friendship, growing up in politics together. But the first time she weighed into the substance on this was September 15th. That's 2 days before Nick's podcast. So let me show you this clip of her completely saying the opposite of what Nick is saying is true.
That the thing that we need here, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now, does all of this mean that Bibi Netanyahu and that this somehow proves that Israel was involved in the assassination of Charlie Kirk? No, we have no evidence of that. We can't say that because there is no evidence of that. But I don't like little lies. That's what I will say. Something that I always say in my household is when there is one lie, there's 20.
Yeah, and she goes into the fact that she sees inconsistencies with how Netanyahu has responded to this, how some of the Zionists have responded to this and tried to make Charlie out to be like Ben Shapiro. But she has not said that Israel's been involved in his murder whatsoever. Nick is totally wrong about that. He's totally lying about that. And it's hard for me to believe. I mean, he's a sharp guy. I don't understand. unless this is out of ignorance, someone that he knows told him that and he just went with it without verifying it. But it wasn't the past week she had been talking about that anyways. You know, it's so insane. 2 days later, he completely says the opposite of what Candace is saying. So Candace is exactly right in that tweet, denying it, saying, hey, it's what Zionists are saying. And apparently what Nick Fuentes is saying, acting indistinguishable from the Zionists in this way. And by the way, it's pretty interesting and kind of humorous, I must say, to see him act like indistinguishable from like CNN liberal establishment types and calling people like Max Blumenthal and Candace Owens Putin shills. Like, that's what I expected to get out of Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, not Nick Fuentes. I can't, it's so absurd. And, you know, there's so many people out there that say, hey, he's the only one that isn't controlled opposition. All these other people in the dissident world and on the dissident right are controlled opposition. But it's Nick Fuentes pushing the same narrative that liberal establishment and military industrial complex shills are on Ukraine, and that Candace is supposedly spreading this rumor that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. She's never said anything of the sort. And as I told you guys before, Max Blumenthal said nothing of the sort too. I can't answer for Jackson Hinkle. I don't follow him as close, but this wasn't the case. These two were not saying that. So Nick is completely wrong on this. I can't overstate it. That's absurd.
And was turning against them, and the donors tried to intervene, and he wouldn't listen. He was going to take the youth with him, so they shot him in the throat symbolically to show they were silencing his voice. That's from her show.
That absolutely isn't from her show. I don't know if he's mistaking this for some other clip, someone else's show, but all this is wrong. And I watch every show of Candace. I found that clip to refute this, but she's definitely not said anything about shooting him in the throat to silence him. That's never come up on her show. You know, blaming Israel for the murder never happened whatsoever. She has talked about the pressure he was feeling from donors that's revealed in the Blumenthal piece in the Gray Zone. But this is just false. It just is.
And lo and behold, now she says, oh, I never claimed that at all. There's no evidence I ever said that. Really?
Yeah.
If anybody
right.
takes this person seriously after this, you are a sucker. This person should have zero credibility going forward. I told you, there is no evidence for this theory. As much as, and believe me, we talk about Israel a lot on the show, and Israel is behind a lot of things. I've talked about that all year. Israel, in my opinion, has basically taken over the Trump administration. That is why we are bombing Iran. That is why we have given them $12 billion so far this year. That is why there is a war against Harvard. That is why FEMA was holding search and rescue funds hostage against municipalities and cities and towns that were boycotting Israel.
Yeah, I'm with him on all that. I'm with him on the Israeli control over this administration and Trump. I think he's right about that. But I also think he's being completely dishonest about, you know, putting this on Candace when it's clearly not something she said. And that he says, like, you can't take this person seriously anymore. Well, can you take him seriously anymore after lying about her position on this? She's never shared once that she believes that Israel did this murder. In fact, she explicitly went the other way in that clip I just showed you. And I can't help but noticing that Nick Fuentes, for how right he is about some things on Israel, he lambasts some of the best critics of Israel. And that's where it seems like he focuses much of his anger and resentment and indignation in politics. The people that are good on Israel, really? People like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Max Blumenthal and Jackson Hinkle and Cenk Uygur. I never pronounce his name right. And Dave Smith. He's been in feuds with all of these people that are good on the Israel issue from a non-interventionist standpoint. Like, that's not America First, to send them money. All those people share that in common. But that is the focus of so many of his feuds. And I think you at least have to wonder why. Especially the people that say he's the only one that isn't controlled opposition. All those other guys are, right? That just doesn't make sense to me, that narrative. So he's right about much of what he just said about Israel. I'm actually generally with him that, like, we don't have cause to blame Israel on this. I've, said that I think he's generally right on those things. But to slam others for supposedly saying that that was their viewpoint when it wasn't, this is just nuts. I've never seen much like this, actually.
We can blame them for a lot, and they're behind a lot. But they're so obviously not behind this. And because I didn't rush to judgment, I was called the shill. Now, the primary driver of this theory, the primary proponent, is now admitting that she was effectively grifting off of this lie.
She never pushed it. She never admitted grifting off of it. She said the opposite and doubled down on that when people were wrong. Like Nick Fuentes.
There was this calculated effort to, by insinuation, imply that Israel was behind it, like almost in a legalistic way, almost in like a lawyerly way. I never said they were behind it. I just, implied it day after day after day. I pretended like I had evidence, never presented it. Maybe that's going behind the paywall too, like my interview with her. What a joke. Talk about discrediting yourself. Talk about discrediting the Israel critical right wing.
Look in a mirror, man. This is wild. How ironic is it that he's talking about discrediting themselves when this is your position after what is documented that she said? Unbelievable, man.
And honestly, that is maybe the biggest damage that is being done. Because that's what everybody recognizes her as, is the face or one of the faces of the Israel critical right wing. And you know what? If you're like the boy who cried wolf and you blame them for everything and literally everything is just Jew, Israel, it does make us look like idiots. It does make us look unserious. It does make it look like we actually don't have arguments, because Israel is behind a lot of things. They're not behind literally everything that happens. You can blame them for a lot. You can't blame them for literally everything that takes place on earth. And if you do, with no evidence, and then you backpedal, then you just look like an idiot. And then you just look like a crank and a kook. And how can anybody take us seriously when Israel is behind something? And here's the damage that's being done. I'm going to be very specific about this. This is not me expressing my personal problems with Candace Owens, although it may come across that way. Let me be very specific. In the background of everything that is happening right now with Charlie Kirk, Israel is rolling tanks through Gaza City. Everybody took their eye off the ball, and while we're talking about Charlie Kirk, and rightfully so, but while we are distracted, Israel is rolling tanks through Gaza City, destroying all their remaining buildings.
Okay, so I'm really with him on this point. This is how you can see I'm not locked into a tribe or, sides. My highest value is the truth and seeking the truth, is that I really agree with this viewpoint that if you blame Israel for literally everything, literally every murder, every situation, every nefarious dealing in government, you're not going to be taken seriously at times when it really is Israel. I think that's actually a legit argument. If I trip over the sidewalk, that doesn't mean that it's Israel that did it. And, that's something that you have to keep in focus here when there's not really much of a narrative that's, placing Israel at the center of this story where they had relations with a shooter that took out Charlie Kirk, whether you think that was Tyler Robinson or not. So when you just cry wolf so many times, at some point the wolf is going to come. And at that point, you're not convincing anyone because no one has followed you. And I think that might be the case in this situation. I hate to say, I do think this is a story no matter what. The dealings of Charlie's donors and the pressures he felt, and Netanyahu's response, which does seem to be shockingly so, full of lies and half-truths and omissions, that is a story. The fact that he lost $2 million from a donor for promising to host Tucker Carlson at his next Turning Point event, that's a story. You know, these corroborating pieces of information that show that he was growing to believe Netanyahu was a bully, he felt frightened by the pressures that's exposed in the Gray Zone article, that's a story, but at some point, if you just leap to default to Israel did it, you're not going to be trusted by almost anyone. And when Israel does do it, you're not going to be trusted by anyone. And besides, our own criminal government does a lot of vile things too, so if you want to troll on this, your response should be, what, are you covering for the CIA? Obviously, the CIA did this. So it's just a point to say that, hey, there's a lot of nefarious governments. There's a lot of nefarious intelligence agencies. Not saying that happened in this case. But if you want to prove that Israel did it and really cling to that narrative, like so faithfully, so rigidly, produce actual evidence. Let's look into it. I'm open to it. I'm open to talking about this issue differently in, say, 6 months from now when we have more information, like we did during the COVID regime, we did after, 9/11, we did after all these situations in which there was nefarious and malevolent acts by the government and intelligence agencies, including our governments and Israel's.
And their next move, after they do this, is they're getting ready for regime change in Iran. Mark my words, take it to the bank. They had been talking about it openly. Marco Rubio was there a few days ago, and that is what the Israelis told the American delegation. We want regime change in Iran. And it's been said often, how will they get the American public behind a war in Iran? It's not a difficult question. It's an obvious question. It's pretty clear that they may use a false flag attack. Quite obviously. They benefited from the war in Iraq. That's why we ask questions about 9/11. If we're going to war in Iran, will there be an analog to that? Will there be an analogous false flag attack? Now, what happens if every time something happens, dummy over there, dummy Candace Owens says, Israel, Israel, Israel. Oh, no, I have no evidence. Oh, I never said they did it. Then when Israel actually does do a false flag, we look like the boy that cried wolf.
Well, theoretically, again, I'm with him if Candace does that, and she didn't do this in this case. And to be clear, she's running an investigation on this murder. She does think that there's multiple individuals involved, not just the shooter that they have. She thinks there's inconsistencies in the narrative, problems with the text messages, etc. I've been watching her show closely, but again, at no point does she blame Israel for Charlie's murder. She just doesn't. But that said, hypothetically, if Nick was right about what he's saying about Candace, if she really did say that, I would have the same qualm with this, actually. And if someone of prominence that has said something to this regard, that would be my problem with it. But the fact is that didn't happen in this case. He's lying, and the documented evidence shows it. Now, I don't know if he responded to pushback on this. I know he's getting it right now. I know he's getting it because there is a crossover between fans of his and fans of Candace, despite their schism. And it's just been dishonesty on his part, on that part of it. It just is.
People are going to say, remember the last time you blamed them with no evidence? Remember the last time? And you said, we don't need evidence. They're just responsible for everything. That's when credibility is going to be really important. It might be of world historical importance, actually, to have credibility in a moment like that. That's why it's important not to take the bait and say that they're behind everything from Cracker Barrel changing their logo to Charlie Kirk being shot to who knows what else. So, talk about a lack of integrity. All she did for the past week was gaslight the public, and by definition, that's what it is. Gaslight her audience, gaslight the public. Netanyahu lied. They shot him in the throat because they're taking his voice. I have all these receipts, but I'm not going to publish them.
I just wonder what show he's watching, man, to say this stuff. This is truly wild. Again, he's a sharp guy. I don't agree with him on a few things, quite a few things. I think he's generally right about Israel's atrocities and the right wing's capture by Israel, Israel's influence in our government, etc. But again, this is just going to make him be discredited, not Candace. Clearly.
And then literally a week later, she's going to put on Twitter, oh, I never said they were behind it. I never said that at all. I just strongly implied it. We all know what you said. We all know what you meant. You dummy. You irresponsible, grifting dummy. I've so had it with that. And at the end of the day, she's just stupid and defines low IQ anti-Semitism.
All right, man. There's a big Venn diagram between Jake Tapper and Anthony Blinken and Nick Fuentes, apparently, on Ukraine, calling some of the best, anti-Israel dissidents Putin shills too. Because, by the way, it's because they happen not to want to fund this proxy war in Ukraine, which has been a disaster too. It flirts with nuclear war. It's as destructive or as dangerous as funding Israel right now, and they're genociding Gaza, certainly so. And just to have this level of dishonesty come out, it really is amazing to watch it. I didn't think I could see this. I mean, this is Nick Fuentes, the one guy that they say is not controlled opposition. That's what the Groypers say, some of them. Don't want to paint them all with a broad brush, but that is what a lot of people seem to say. Have a lot of problems with the people he feuds with, many of which are really, 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 really good on Israel, including Dave Smith and Max Blumenthal and Jackson Hinkle and Candace Owens and Cenk Uygur and some others that he's concentrated a lot of his anger and resentment on. Tucker Carlson. Say what you want about his dispute with Tucker and lying about his CIA father and whatever. I mean, he might be right about all that, but again, it seems like he focuses more of his energy against the anti-Israel dissidents, especially those on the right, than he does actually the neocons and liberal establishment hacks entrenched in government sometimes. And yeah, I watch his show, man. People in the comments are going to say, well, you don't watch Nick Fuentes then. I actually do. And this episode was painful to watch because of how farcical it was. And I don't know if he's going to be able to sell this to his followers, man. Again, there is some crossover here between these audiences to know that that's just a complete and utter lie about Candace. But let me know in the comments if he has retracted any of this, because wow, this really honestly floors me. And I gotta say too, in my admission, I think one of the best eulogies for Charlie Kirk was by who? By Nick Fuentes, believe it or not. Nick had one of the best responses, I feel like, to Charlie's death than anyone else in the dissident world. He was saying things like, Charlie was my enemy. I antagonized him a lot and he hated me. But what I really admired about Charlie Kirk was he wore the name of Jesus Christ on his sleeve as he walked into those college campuses, proudly defending the word of Christ. And I would never wish him harm, and I hope his gift is in heaven. His reward is in heaven. And wow, man, it was like poetic. I loved that response. That was the perfect response. I didn't like everything I saw in that episode where he called for government censorship over people that, cheered his death. I don't like them cheering his death as much as anyone else, but it looks like, a lot of the market's taking care of that, by the way. People sending employers messages showing that people are, cheering his death and they're getting fired in mass numbers, it seems like in some cases. But at the same time, his eulogy was perfect. So it's so frustrating and dishonest to see what he's doing to Candace here. And I hope most people agree. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Let me know in the comments below. Is Nick Fuentes right about this? Why is he doing this? Is there some nefarious purpose involved in his mind of trying to divide the right? Is he just, is he making good points here? Because I think there were some of those too, by the way. Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. And this video is over on Rumble. He doesn't have a YouTube, but please consider becoming a YouTube member of me. Click the join button below and you can help support the channel. In return for that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.